Welcome to Jewish Midlife. I'm Devora Krasnianski, and in today's episode, we're diving into a topic that's often only whispered about but rarely openly discussed: the complexities of intimacy and sexual intimacy in midlife. And this conversation is with Faigy Pollock, who's an expert on marriage and intimacy, and we delve into the dynamics of relationship during midlife years. As family dynamics shift, empty nest, more time, less time, changes in our bodies, hormones, libido, so much can be happening, and Faigy provides valuable insights for all of this. We explore the importance of maintaining a physical relationship throughout life and how it's never too late to cultivate meaningful and fulfilling intimacy. Enjoy the episode. So I'm really excited, Faigy, to be having this conversation. At midlife, our lives changing physically, emotionally, our life circumstances, and all that can affect our sexual intimacy. So let's just talk about that. And before we get started, let's just talk about you and how you got into this.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much, Devora, for this opportunity to be able to share with many women. I think we both share a passion of empowering women, and it's exciting for me as I grow older. Baruch Hashem, I am already blessed with a grandchild. So as I'm getting closer, I mean, I still think I have some time until I reach menopause, but as I get closer and I've been thinking ahead and learning ahead. This is a very exciting opportunity for me personally in my own personal life, and anything that I feel passionate and excited about, I'm obviously going to bring to the world with a different level of clarity and connection and compassion. So my name is Faigy Pollock, and I live in Eretz Yisrael, and I've been Baruch Hashem blessed. I've been married for it's now 23 years, 23, blessed with 7 children. And when I got married many moons ago, hadracha back then, I would say, was definitely better than perhaps the hadracha that my mother's generation was receiving, but definitely not what it's hopefully becoming today. And the guidance that I got as a young kala, as a young bride, thank God, was not negative, but in no way was it sufficient. And it took many challenging events and painful moments to realize that my husband and I were just lacking very basic guidance. There wasn't anything innately wrong with us. And when I came to that realization that really all I was missing was guidance and hadracha, I made myself this promise. I said, I will find those answers for myself. And then when I find them, I'm going to share them with anyone who's willing to listen to me, because no one deserves to go through that. If problems can be avoided with information, which is what you're doing, empowering women with information, and information can help us reach transformation. So then that's what I want to do. So I set out on this journey having no clue where it would lead. And then the light that it's brought into my life, and I am so humbled and thankful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the light that he's shown me, the answers that he's blessed me with, the knowledge that he's literally brought, into the world through me so that I can share with others, has impacted, first of all, my own life, my own family, in ways that go beyond my wildest dreams. And to be able to share that goodness with the people around me is what I know today I was put in this world, in this lifetime, to do. So it first started out as a journey of looking for my own answers. Once finding those, decided, well, I want to teach kalas. I want to give them an experience that wasn't fortunate enough to have. So I became a kala teacher. And then what happened with time was, kalas that I was teaching were sending me their married friends saying, oh, you didn't go to Faigy Pollock, maybe you want to go to her for a lesson or two. So before I knew it, I had married women looking and seeking to meet with me. At the same time, another journey of mine, which would be maybe a very different episode on a different podcast, I also had a journey with anxiety and living with anxiety, and Baruch Hashem, healing from that. So at the same time as I'm going through this intimacy and sexual intimacy journey of quest of knowledge and information, I'm also going through my own battle with anxiety and seeking tools to deal with that. So on the side, I was also training at the time as an EFT practitioner, which is a certain modality used it can be used for many things: clearing trauma, clearing negative beliefs. And at that time I was teaching kalas and working as an EFT practitioner. And then before I knew it, I started to notice that these two worlds were just merging together. And I was seeing women and using a lot of the EFT tools to help them through intimacy related things. Because we have to understand that sexual intimacy is something that runs so deep, right? It involves body, mind, soul. So if someone is having difficulty in that part of their life, it's not just a tip, a technique, or a tool, sorry. It's, oh, you're feeling stressed, it hurts, just drink some wine and relax. Like we all know today that that doesn't work, right? So there's deeper things going on, and the EFT really helps to uncover those things. So before I knew it, I had a full practice working with women, and without officially setting out to become an intimacy coach, I just found myself being that. So then I decided that I really wanted to take my training a little bit more seriously, take it to a more professional level. I did some training, some more professional training in a more organized fashion. And then the idea was born to actually take all of this and go online, because I'm limited with the amount of hours that I can see people. And I really, really felt very, very passionate. And I felt like it's mamash, my obligation and my calling to share this information with others. So hence my online intimacy course was born. So that was a whole nother beautiful project and an ongoing project. And then here I am today, really excited to be here and share some of that knowledge that I've been blessed with, the experience that I've accumulated, and really just to give every woman at every stage in life the message that deep inside her, underneath layers of what might be layers of pain, resentment, confusion, trauma, deep inside, there's a beautiful woman that knows how to be exactly the right kind of woman to her husband at every given moment in her marriage. And it's my responsibility, I feel, to help women uncover that and get in touch with that. So
Wow. Oh,
yeah,
good for you. What
take
an
it from
interesting
there.
journey. All right. So you start off with college, but now you work with women of all ages, and we'll
Yes,
focus today on midlife.
yes.
So I'm sure that the conversations are different when someone is a newlywed, no matter what age they are. But let's talk about someone who's been married for several years by the time they get to midlife.
Right.
And there's so much going on. They're changing of the family dynamics. Their kids are moving out or getting married, moving out, going to yeshiva, whatever stage they are at this point. And then there's for some people perimenopause, menopause, again, wherever. So let's talk about how all that impacts the sexual intimacy. And I just want to clarify the difference between intimacy and sexual intimacy. Because let's start there.
Okay. So in our community where people, and rightfully so, right? We want to use what we refer to as lashon nikia. We want to refer to the sexual intimate relationship in a way that doesn't cheapen it, right? And we want to use language that's refined. So we've gravitated as a community to using the word intimacy to express sexual intimacy because people feel more comfortable using that term and without getting into the whole conversation. Is that right? Is that wrong? Everyone has to make the decision of what's right for them, what's right in their community. Definitely when I'm talking publicly, I'll use certain terminology that's way more refined. Whereas when I'm talking to my children and explaining to them about the facts of life, I'll use different language and explain to them this is language that we use when we need to say the words, right? When you go to the doctor, you need to know what the parts are called, right? When you're going into labor, you need to know what your body is called. You can't just down there. When you're sitting in front of a doctor, if unfortunately a couple is going through fertility treatments, right? They need to be able to say the words, okay? So the reason that this word intimacy became used for sexual intimacy is I think more of like a community. I don't know if the word is cultural because it's more than just a culture. There's definitely an essential reason why that word is used. So the word is often thrown around and it could be very confusing because while sexual intimacy is not always permitted between a husband and wife, for instance, when she's Anita, right? That's a time where a husband and wife cannot engage in physical sexual activity. Emotional intimacy better be there all the time. That's the essence of marriage is that. So sometimes that intimacy will also express itself in the physical realm, but that's only the expression of something that has to always be there. And this is something I teach this to my colleagues from day one. During Need Days, it's not that there's a few days a month that we love each other and then there's a few days a month where we don't. God forbid, that would be tragic. We have to always work. The avoda of marriage is the avoda of ahava. Ahava, which is, we translate it as love, but ahava is the same numerical value as the word echad, which means one. A marriage, the marital union, is the reflection of God's oneness in the world. And that's why in marriage, we want to work on that every single day. And when I say becoming one, I don't mean losing ourselves We're not talking about crossing of boundaries. We're talking about a whole person choosing to connect with another whole person. And the most accurate expression of that, when those two whole people are present, is going to culminate in sexual intimacy, which sometimes will happen, sometimes won't. One of the perks of menopause, once a woman stops getting her period altogether, is actually that there's never going to be any days where they can't express that sexually because there's no need the days. Now that's of course the challenge as well, which we will get to. But yes, thank you. This clarification is very, very important. And therefore, in our conversation, whenever we're talking about the physical aspect of intimacy, I'll use the term sexual intimacy or marital relations if we're talking about the actual act of two human beings connecting physically. Okay, that's just to all so that all audience will be comfortable and that it should be very clear what we're talking about.
I think that clarity is very important because when we talk about intimacy 2 weeks a month or 2 weeks, and then when you get to a stage where it's all you can do it and whatever you want, the intimacy was like, what is that? We never really had the emotional intimacy. We're not to the level that it should be because it was confusing. So
Yeah.
I hope for all callers that it becomes clear, but that's just for
Yes.
our conversation. I'm glad we clarified it. Okay.
Yes, this is very important. And I do hope and pray that anyone listening, if they have any influence and if they're Kala teachers, to really continue to convey this message that we should continue, of course, to use refined language 100%, but we want to make sure that the message that Kalas are walking away with is that marriage has to always be an intimate relationship. There's always an intimacy that needs to be present between husband and wife to the extent that there's a prohibition for a stranger to sleep in the same bedroom as a married couple, even when it's not their Tahara days. We would think, well, if she's a Nida anyway, nothing really much is happening. And Chazal are teaching us that that's not true. There's always intimacy. It can't be sexual. It can't be the things that a couple can't do during her Nida days, but there's still intimacy. And that's a space where no one else is allowed to enter. And that has to always be there. And I just think that that is something that this is a message that needs to be given over loud and clear, but that's more for like the younger crowd. They need to hear that. So let's
Well,
continue.
especially if it wasn't there, if you didn't have this intimacy in the younger years, when you have all this time when of no nida, yes nida, like that, then if there wasn't a relationship, then it's going to be much more difficult.
Right. 100%.
So let's
100%.
talk about that's how midlife, when life is changing.
So I want to ask you a question, just because I know that the women on my list are going to be listening to this great podcast, and Mr. Shannon will come out beautiful. I would just love for you to define, now that I defined intimacy versus sexual intimacy or marital intimacy. Can you please define menopause? When does menopause begin? What is menopause? Okay. And I think that that's also an important definition for this conversation.
Okay. So menopause is really when your period ends, and it's usually defined a year after your last period, so you know that it really has ended. But all those years before, in perimenopause, when our hormones start changing up, down, our periods may be uneven, maybe very long, very short, big, long distance, long times, and short times. Everyone's experience is different. And for some people, they get all kinds of fun symptoms, whether it's symptoms like hot flashes, which is a typical one, but there's like 30, some people define 30, 100 symptoms, all kinds of different things that people may not really anticipate that they're really perimenopause or menopause related. They just think that it's life, we're getting older. And all these could be part of perimenopause. And of course, after the menopause, after a year of not having your periods, is what people call postmenopause. And then still with the lower estrogen, there's a whole bunch of hormone and other related symptoms. And we're just older, so we have to take care of ourselves from when we were younger all the way till the end of our lives. So with all those hormone changes, and many times that actually is at the same time when our family dynamics are changing. Our kids are moving out of the house, making weddings, big expenses, empty nesting, all of that happening.
So Devora, perimenopause starts around like the average, around what age?
Well, menopause in the West is at like 51. And that's the average. Some people could start earlier. And then perimenopause can start 5 to 7 years before. So for some people, if they will end up being menopausal in the 45, their perimenopause can be even in their 30s. So
this is so important because I think people don't realize that. People think menopause like, oh, I have time for that. Like I know myself, I'm going to be turning 42 in August. And I could tell you, like on my own body, like I'm starting to feel this past year, like I know things are starting to change, and I've been reading up a lot. Just that's my nature to just be a researcher and to just soak in information. And that's why I find it such hashgacha practice that we showed up in each other's lives at this point in time. And it really, I really feel like women don't understand the effect and just how what's the word, like the span of these years. It's not just like an isolated few months. It's a span. It could be a decade,
It
but
could be a decade.
between,
For some people, it could be longer because
yeah,
they could have a long
yeah,
perimenopause and then
right.
and postmenopause with all the symptoms.
Exactly.
And so
Exactly.
knowledge is, and that's why I'm doing this because it also comes at the same time as when our family, when our life changes also.
Right.
And sometimes it comes with the idea of what am I doing next? What's my life about? So all
Right.
that happening at the same time. And I think that all of that kind of leading back to the conversation with you, all of that shows up in our sexual life altogether
Yeah.
with the
Oh, for
hormones and
sure.
the emotions and the relationships
For
and the
sure.
time. So
Right.
let's pick from one angle to start from. Let's
Okay. So I will just say, I feel comfortable to talk about things that I've experienced that I know about. I almost feel like, who am I to talk about women who finished getting their periods, they're at a very different stage in life? I feel like I have to learn from them. Like, who am I to teach them? I don't know. I'm not there yet, right? So based on the extensive training that I've done, I can imagine it. I could see it. I could give my 2 cents of some professional maybe insight or advice, but I'm not holding there yet. So I want to hear more, like, from you as someone who is, I guess, older than myself, right? And you're at a different stage. What are the concerns? What are the things that women need to hear? This is like the beginning of a whole new part of life. And today, with thank heaven, I mean, the longevity statistics, and people are living longer. 50, what's 50? 50 is young, and to say, like, oh, I couldn't figure out this issue till today, nothing's ever going to change. I just thought was such a sad message, and I don't want anyone to have that feeling. So even if a woman finds herself at my stage in life where, Baruch Hashem, I have a grandchild and a child in Shidduchim and another one just about to start and a daughter going to nursing school. Like, there's a lot going on, and my youngest is 4, and my cycles are starting to shift, and life is very hectic. So I feel like I'm at the maybe the very, very, very beginning of perimenopause. I already can anticipate how challenging this can be. And a woman might think to herself, well, I've been in this marriage for 2, 3, 4 decades, and it's been kind of like dry all along, and there hasn't really been this emotional intimacy that these ladies are talking about. Like, I, is there any chance, any point in working on this? And I really just want to give the message that it's really never too late. Now, a disclaimer: unfortunately, some marriages are essentially unhealthy or even abusive, and in those kind of cases, I don't think that the right thing to say is, oh, yeah, let's give it another 40 years, right? And sometimes, actually, at that stage in life, that's when women make a courageous decision to get up and leave an unhealthy situation. And that's what someone in that situation should do. Okay, not to have that fear, but to get up and get out of a marriage that is essentially and like something that's like rotten to the root, and something that's abusive and harmful. A woman should not stay in such a marriage. Okay, but putting those aside, and hoping and praying that those women have the right people guiding them and they have the support that they need, let's talk about the average marriage, where a couple gets married, they're hopefully blessed with children within the first few years of marriage, and then life becomes very, very hectic very fast. And someone once asked me a very, very, almost like a jarring question. She said to me, do you identify more as a mother or more as a wife? And this was when I was like very busy raising 5 kids close in age. And I stopped and I said, whoa, that's a very interesting question. I had to think about it for a minute. And within a few moments, it was pretty clear to me. No, I first identify as a wife and then as a mother. So she said to me, as a person who's involved with people, this is an interesting question to ask, because some women, they'll very, very easily answer, oh, a mother. Yeah, I'm also a wife. And with some, you'll see right away this, like, oh, I'm a wife and then a mother. And I think that since the natural order of things is that we first become a wife and only then a mother, and we mother for however many decades we're lucky enough to have children and then raise them and they fly away from the nest, right? We have to always remember that our identity, first and foremost, is a self. Whoa, I should have said that first. A self. Always, always make sure to invest in the self that's not contingent on being a wife or being a mother or being a business owner or being a creative or being just a self, okay? And everyone figuring out what that means in their life, that's a whole topic on its own. But let's go to the wife and mothering conflict, which I think at menopause and perimenopause will once again come up strongly, but in a different way. It's not going to be nursing babies through the night and then therefore not having time or strength for sexual intimacy. It'll be more like your teens need you until 3 o'clock in the morning, but you had a date with your husband and you actually came back from the mikvah because maybe this is going to be the last time you go. You don't even know. And, there's a crisis and your kid, in college needs you, or your married daughter needs you, or whatever might be going on. And then those little children, little problems, right? Big kids, big problems. It doesn't sound very positive to say it that way, but definitely the challenges grow as they grow. And if we don't really build a very strong wife identity, then it's going to be definitely more challenging to do that the older we get. And then suddenly the mother identity is dissolving a little bit. And we're going from mother to hopefully grandmother, and it's a different role that we're playing. And of course, we're always going to be mothers, but hopefully our children are going to leave home. That's the natural, healthy way, and that's what we all pray for. And then suddenly it's like, who's this grumpy old man that I'm married to? And where is that wife in me? Did I ever even develop that? So when I talk to young women, I really, really express this, and I say, you have to build that wife identity. You need to learn, like, you have to be your husband's girlfriend. Like, you have to be playful and find things to do together, go on dates, like really, really make sure in all those busy years to really, really strengthen that wife identity. And this is also so very true when we get older. Now, as far as our children are concerned, I think it's such healthy modeling, right? So when they're very little and mommy gets a babysitter while they're sleeping, they don't know that mommy and daddy went out on a date and had fun. But when they're teens and you say, I don't care what's going on in the house tonight, mommy and daddy, we're going out for supper, take care of the house, take care of what needs to get done. All the teens at home could do what they have to do. And your children see that you invest in your marriage. That's modeling to them, hopefully, like an understanding of marriage and appreciation of marriage, and hopefully giving them the tools to build their own marriage one day. So that's, I think, something that's very, very important to keep in mind.
So at any point, it's worth reinvesting or trying to figure it out, getting back on track,
Yeah.
especially when you have empty nest, or especially when it's very busy, and you could very well be busy with your adult kids and your little kids and your adult kids and is making simchas, flying to the grandchildren here, there. So like, it just becomes two people. And so I think it's really important to really put that into the schedule.
Right.
And
It's
schedule it,
interesting. I'm
especially
looking.
when there's not need to schedule it. Like, you really have to schedule it.
Right. So I want to add a few things to what you're saying. It's interesting. I'm reflecting right now. I'm very blessed. My parents are very, very unique, special people. I'm their oldest, and I'm actually the oldest of 11. So my mother, really, she's like Mother Earth. She really was the proud, pregnant mother, nursing mother. Like, that's really what's in our bones. And I'm her oldest. So it's interesting. I look back at all the years that my parents were raising children, and it was busy. And to me, this is very, very special, because to see them grow so gracefully into this next stage where now they are best friends, like we laughed at, they're like a young couple. And I look at that and I say to myself, first of all, I thank Hashem, I'm very blessed. I know that not everyone has that experience. And some people might look to that stage in life with fear and feel terrified, like, whoa, so there's going to be the very busy, hectic years. I think those are the years that I'm encountering now and just about entering. I can imagine that the next 5-10 years will be very, very hectic. But then after that, suddenly there'll be boredom, there'll be time. Physically, there might be less energy unless we are very motivated and take care of ourselves and eat and do exercise, right? But it's almost like if we look at our life like a day, right? The sun rises, then we have the afternoon, and then the evening, like the sun starts to set, and there's a certain like calm and serenity, or there could be like an emptiness and a sadness. And this is definitely something I've been thinking a lot about, because I'm still in my early 40s. So I'm starting to like sense the beginning of this process and thinking ahead, like, what do I want our later years to look like? Do I want it to be this like empty, dull sadness, or do I want it to just be this like serenity of later years? And when you were saying about not having Nida, which Nida kind of like forces you to then schedule, right? So this is true for menopause, but this happens to also be true for many women during childbearing years when they're, let's say, nursing clean. So those call it the skills that women will hopefully develop early on in their marriage, where they're not getting their periods regularly, they're not cycling. Some women could not cycle for even a year and a half when they're nursing, which I know most women are going to cycle earlier than that. But we have to figure out tools to make intimacy, and I mean here sexual intimacy, a priority. If we're only going to rely on the let's call it the externally imposed schedule or spontaneity, it's just not going to happen. So if we look at, let's say, a couple, right? I look at, like, I teach kalas, they come back after the wedding, they come back for a few sessions. And I look at the first few months of their marriage, right? So there's 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Okay, it's very misudar in most cases. And then, please God, many of them get pregnant. Okay, so now we have 9 months where there isn't that. So if we can empower them at that young stage to figure out how to make sexual intimacy a central part of their life and to build around it, then hopefully when this couple turns 50, they'll know how to do that already. Okay? So again, it's never too late. And I think in my opinion, the focus needs to be as we grow older, and here I'm going to use the word intimacy in the emotional intimacy aspect. Now I'll backtrack. I'll say it like this. As any woman listening to this podcast knows, that for a woman, the physical desire, the physiological desire, and the emotional world are inseparable. Okay? If a woman is not feeling that there's the potential, and I'm wording this specifically with these words, and I'll explain why in a minute. If a woman doesn't sense that there's the potential for a safety and a security and for many of her needs, not all of them, because there's no perfection, but that many of her needs being met in this relationship in these moments, then the chances of her body reacting with physiological desire to connect and being able to become aroused, those chances drop drastically, if not down to zero. Okay? So they're inseparable. Whereas for a man, those worlds can be separated, and his avoda is to actually work on constantly connecting them. A man can fall into the trap of connecting with a woman without being innately connected with her. Whereas a woman is so loyal. That's the woman's nature. And that's why a woman, if anything, a woman's avoda in marriage is to share with her husband what her needs are, the ones that she senses her husband can fulfill, and to learn how to word those requests in a way that make her husband feel empowered that he can fulfill them, so that when he then does fulfill them, she's sensing that emotional security, and then there's a chance that her body will also respond with physiological desire. And then everything comes together so beautifully, because ultimately, what every healthy husband wants to do is make his wife happy. Now, for a man, it could be a very frustrating experience, and this can be the dynamic from day one. It doesn't matter if they're 20 or 50 or 80. This feeling of no matter what I do, she's never happy. It's never good enough, okay? And a woman's constant feeling of maybe resentment, or even, I'll dare say, almost feeling used. Like, does he really love me? Is he interested in me or in my body? Why is it that when we're together in very, very sexual, intimate moments, he's so forthcoming, but then outside the bedroom, he's so reserved and quiet? Does he really love me? Does he want my body? So these are questions that women might walk around with for many, many years of marriage. And if they don't find answers to those questions, that's going to play out later on in their life, when suddenly there's a lot of time and there's a lot of space. And this is something that I think, where women need to realize two things, okay? And again, I'm talking about in healthy marriages, okay? For a man, the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a man, or we'll say, you know what, I'll backtrack again. Ultimately, the desire for two human beings, for a man and a woman to connect intimately through the act of sexual intimacy, at its root, when I'm talking at the essence level, is really the desire of two souls to become one, okay? And as I said at the beginning of this talk, the marriage union is the expression of God's oneness in the world, expressing through us. Adam, right? Adam is made up of a zachar and a nekeva. Adam, the word Adam is like the word edme le'elyon. I will be similar. I am like Hashem. So we are tselem Elokim when we're zachar and nekeva together. And in the spiritual realms, in the olam haneshamos, every couple's neshama is made up of a male and female part. Now, don't ask me, how does that work with divorce? And if God forbid someone loses their spouse and then gets remarried, I don't know. I'm not a Kabbalist. I don't know much about souls. But from the things that we've been taught, we're talking here about concepts that the male and female soul are two expressions of a whole. Now, when these souls come into this world, into a body, so we have a male body and a female body, there's a longing at the soul level to experience the highest pleasure of all. That pleasure is the pleasure of wholeness. That's the pleasure that those souls experienced before they came down into this physical world. This pleasure that we could not possibly fathom because we're too limited to even grasp the pleasure of those spiritual realms. So these neshamos, these souls come into a body. And now imagine my hands and imagine if I had gloves on my hands, okay? So the gloves are the bodies and the hands are the souls. And if I'm freezing cold and I connect my hands together, I don't say that I connected my gloves. That would be ridiculous. I say that I connected my hands. So in the moment when husband and wife come together through true love and connection and seeing each other and wanting to connect from a place of genuine desire to be whole, the wholeness that they experience and the pleasure that's available to them is that pleasure of the neshamos becoming one. The sexual pleasure that's available to us human beings in this world, when accessed properly, is a spark of the divine pleasure that we will experience when our neshamos exit our body and aren't confined anymore and go back to the spiritual realms. So the spark of that is the sexual pleasure that husband and wife can experience. That's why, by the way, it's very important. Obviously, pleasure is not the goal. The goal is the union. The goal is the oneness. But pleasure is a very, very integral part of sexual intimacy. And this is very, very clear in all of our sources. So again, we're not obsessed with the pleasure. We're not grading the pleasure from 1 to 10, but there needs to be pleasure on some level, sometimes more, sometimes less, because that pleasure in halacha is referred to as devek, as glue. It helps to bring those two things together, reunite those two bodies, two souls, and make them feel very, very close to each other once again. And that's why it's very, very important to know this and to make an effort in our marriage to learn about this. And for a woman, again, this goes back to a woman learning herself and learning to vulnerably express that to her husband, because there's nothing that he wants more than to make her happy. So he wants to make her happy. And the more she can express the needs that she has and he can fulfill those, so everyone's needs are being met. So if we would go back to this idea of the sexual intimate relationship as an expression of two bodies connecting, which is like a hook and a link to really the two souls reuniting, and the real pleasure being that moment. And I'm hoping that by the time women reach menopause, they can relate to this. There's like a moment where a husband and wife, in those beautiful moments, there's almost like a moment of transcendence where a couple might feel, I've known you for a million years. It's this very beautiful, sweet moment that couples are hopefully tapping into, that of course also involves hormones and physiology and blood flow, but it's beyond that, right? And that's the wholeness and that's the pleasure. So if you can imagine a triangle, and at the very tip, we have that wholeness that we're talking about. And that's the real yearning and the real longing of what a couple wants to achieve. That's the real comfort. So then at one angle of the triangle, we have what we would call, let's say, the physical aspect of the relationship. And then we have the emotional aspect. And when I show this triangle to college or young women, I ask them, based on the things that I'm saying, where would you put down on this triangle? Where would you put down the man? Where would you put the woman? So very often the answer is, well, oh, the men are more physical, the women are more emotional. To which I say, not accurately. No, that's not 100% true. Because of course a woman in a healthy marriage, when things are in place, she can experience tremendous physical arousal and pleasure, just as a decent man who's loyal to his wife and loves her very much craves an emotional relationship with her. So then what's the difference? The difference is, what need am I aware of first? Okay. So very often a man, for sure in the younger years, will be very aware in his body of his desire to connect with a woman. That doesn't mean that all he wants to do is be physical with her, but he'll feel it. His body will talk to him and say, I want to be in a relationship with a woman. So when that body, right, that physical need is available and he's aware of it, that when he has a woman who's reciprocating and is in a relationship with him and loves him and respects him, then very, very instantaneously, that will open up his heart to want to have, like we said, a very deep relationship with her, which will include all aspects of the emotional intimacy and the physical intimacy, which will then hopefully bring them to moments throughout their marriage where they'll sense that sweetness of what I described before. Whereas by a woman, like I said, there needs to be the potential. There's never 100%. A woman will never feel 100% satisfied all the time and always happy. This is something that we all are challenged with, and this is a battle for us women. And that's a whole nother topic, which is fascinating to understand why it's like that, where that started, why it's a tikkun. But if she senses that there's potential, she knows that her husband really loves her and cares about her. So then with the right, let's call it the right context, with her husband learning what I call the art of pleasuring a woman. So then there's a chance that her body will sometimes respond, not always, because there are times in our life where our hormones are just so down in the dumps that it makes it much more challenging. But it definitely won't happen if there's not that emotional closeness. Okay. So as a couple reaches menopause, and I know that this is true about men, which it's interesting. I think there should also be more awareness in our community of what's called andropause, right? Men reaching menopause and the changes that they undergo. And this is something that I see a lot with the women that I work with, as you know, their husband's age and they reach their mid to late 40s, early 50s, 60s, and they have, when it comes to actually functioning with their wife in the bedroom, things can become compromised over there. And this is where any woman listening to this, if you're struggling with this, there are solutions out there. Speak to your doctor. Sometimes this can be a sign of a heart condition that's developing, the very, very beginning of it. Things can be dealt with. There's medication available for people who feel comfortable with that. Sometimes minor lifestyle changes, but just to understand that as we are going through changes, so are men. So what very often happens, that's very interesting, as a couple reaches this menopause stage, is if in early marriage, very often, not always, but in many marriages, the husband is the high desire partner. He's the spontaneous desire partner. He's the one always initiating the physical intimacy. Very often when we reach menopause, what often happens is it flips a little bit, because as a man's hormones start to kind of like drop a little bit, very often at this stage, especially if it's a marriage where they've cultivated a lot of what we've spoken about, suddenly she's sleeping more than 4 hours a night because her baby's not waking up every minute and she's not pregnant and nauseous, and things are shifting a little bit, and suddenly a wife actually might find herself in the position of high desire partner. And suddenly I don't, it would be interesting for me to hear from you if you've seen this to be true, but I've noticed with women that I work with that in this age group, it's common to see that women, they're the ones that are feeling a little bit rejected. My husband is so busy. He's so stressed all the time. I miss him. I want to be with him. Why am I always the one initiating? And this is like a very interesting flip. And I'll often ask, has it always been this way? And they'll be like, no, it's so weird. Like, it was never like this. And only in the past 5 years, it started to change. And at first, my husband was like delighted, like, finally, we're on the same page. And then slowly this started to shift. So this is a very interesting thing that I've noticed, and I've actually asked around people that, people that I work with, colleagues. This is a common thing, and I'm curious to hear if this is something, Devora, that you've encountered.
Definitely, we see some of that for when we actually dug deeper. For some of them, for some of the men, the husbands, is that the stress of the money to cover everything, maybe a part of it, or
Wow.
the stress, whether it's comes to physically, or just there's not enough time because they're trying to cover all the things of their life And so there is definitely but we're also finding is some women's libido, whether it's hormonally, is like really low, and then they
Plummeting.
are feeling like that they need to do this for their husband, and that they don't like to feel like they need to do this. And so that's why we're looking for some new insights about how our bodies work, how emotionally, how all that can really work together. Maybe start earlier in the day or earlier in the week, like some of those
Right.
kind of tips.
Okay, great. So let's go there a little bit. So this, I need to do it for my husband, right? Which gets thrown around a lot. And I'm treading very carefully over here, because does a woman, I'll say it this way, by a woman marrying her husband, she hereby commits to be involved with him in a sexual relationship. That's part of marriage. The physical relationship is part of marriage. But that being said, a woman has to understand that in order for the system to work properly, a woman has to be able to be very, very in tune and honest with herself. And I think there's not enough space and legitimization, if there is such a word, of that. So to say to a woman, oh, you should only be with your husband if you absolutely feel like it. If you don't feel like it, tough luck to him. No, that's not a Jewish approach. We enter marriage to become givers, to expand ourself beyond ourselves. But to say, you're doing this for your husband, and if you don't show up for him, oh, you're gonna burn in hell, right? And women walk around, unfortunately, with a fear, with an anxiety, with a lot of guilt that they better show up for their husband. Now, should we show up for our husband? Of course we should. But should we show up with that energy that I described before? No. And I want to explain something that might really, shed some light on this. I found it very helpful in my own marriage and in the way I teach women to view our marriage not as it's your needs or my needs, and can I fulfill your needs? Can you fulfill my needs? And everyone's very, very busy with like whose needs and who's going to fulfill whose needs. Rather, step back. We have this beautiful, living, breathing, growing entity called our marriage. And imagine that that was like a bank account. Now, if we want to amass wealth, we all know that we need to invest. We need to make more more deposits than withdrawals. If we do something that to the onlooker seems like we're giving, okay? Husband comes home at the end of the day and he's tired and he just wants to unwind. And for some men, this is how they like to unwind. They get into bed with their wife and they're intimate and they have a beautiful experience. And the wife is really, really, really not up to it. It's just not an option for her. It's just not on the agenda for her tonight in any shape or form. But she decides that she's going to be there for him, almost like with like a martyr approach, which is very unhealthy. So she tries to do what she can, and a woman can fake it. And let me tell you, women can fake it their entire marriage. Okay. And this is very dangerous, because if you're faking something, you're not fully there. And if the whole connection is about fully showing up and connecting, and you're faking, that's a mask. That means that there's a barrier between you and your spouse. We don't want that. So let's say this wife, she's really learned how to become a very good actress and she's there for him. And she walks away, unfortunately, not feeling connected, but feeling very negative, feeling maybe taken advantage of, God forbid, feeling empty, feeling resentful, a whole bunch of negative things she might be feeling. So on the outside, it looks very noble. She was so, so tired and so out of it, and maybe even a little bit upset at him about something, but she's a good wife. She just suppresses all of that and she shows up. Okay, let's look at the marriage. What just happened in the marriage bank account? She made a withdrawal. She didn't make a deposit. So it looks like she gave to her husband, but she made a withdrawal to the marriage. And eventually, a marriage that is not invested in and there's only withdrawal happening, that marriage is going to either fall apart completely, unfortunately, and we see that, or it's just going to be a very, very, very compromised marriage. So a better way is to learn, as difficult as this is, and there's no question that by the time we reach menopause and we've been married for a while, this is more difficult, but it's never too late to learn to be real, to be honest, to be able to look your husband in the eye and say, there's a part of me that always wants you. Right now, I'm not feeling so connected to that part. When we had that very loaded discussion this afternoon about the finances with the wedding coming up, I felt very unheard. And I just need to get over that, and I need some space. There's a part of me that always wants, but right now I'm not connected to that part. So to be able to put that on the table, as vulnerable and as painful as that might be. Now, this is going to be challenging to, I'd say, pretty much everyone, all women. Some women, this will be very, very, very challenging to be able to make themselves vulnerable in that way. But I would say if we want to work on something, and if I would want someone to take something from this talk as we hit perimenopause, menopause, and into Bezrat Hashem, our golden years, it's this. Learning to be real. I heard once, intimacy, into me, see. The only way that we can allow someone to see into me is if we're willing, finally, by the time we hit our, 40s, 50s, to finally take off the masks. In Judaism, sexual intimacy is ideally done unclad, without clothing on. Just like Adam and Chava in Gan Eden, that it says about them, arumim velo yisbo shashu. There were no clothing, and there was no shame of that nakedness, because what they saw was beyond the body. They saw the soul shining through with such dazzling light and clarity. And we want to reach that state in our marriage. And I'm talking now physically and emotionally, where we can be in a state of arumim velo yisbo shashu, where we can finally take off the covers. And believe me, I say this to Kalas, I say right now, you're sitting and thinking to yourself, I'm never going to be able to take off my clothing, right? And I say, you'll see, you don't know. You might suddenly feel like you want to. But you're going to faster take off your physical clothing than you're going to take off those layers of emotional layers and coverages that we cover ourselves with. So as we hit these golden years, perimenopause, menopause, and into later years, where things are going to change, and things are going to change fast and intensely, and a lot's going to be going on for us. If we haven't mastered the skill already, I would say that that's probably the most important thing to work on, to really get real, to be able to look your husband in the eye and say, I want to be able to make this a priority, but my body is just not on board anymore. Let's try to figure out what connects me to my physical desires. What needs to be done differently? It could be that the script, and every couple has a script, how they get into bed, and whatever happens based on their script. When we get to the stage in life, and I see this also a lot, women are like itching to change the script. It's not working for me anymore. What we used to do when we were 20, it's not working for me anymore. I need different. And to be able to express that to our husband, to look in his eye and trust that if this is the man that HaKadosh Baruch Hu destined that I marry, and that we go through life in this lifetime on this journey together, that even though I don't see it right now, and I don't believe it because I have 20 or 30 years of marriage to prove otherwise, but to know that underneath those layers, this man has inside him what he needs to fulfill me as a woman. And I want to tap into the woman in me and give him that look in the eye that I trust that he could figure this out, and we could get either the guidance that we need, the help that we need, whatever it might be, to really transform the later years of marriage. And I've been very blessed. I have this online course. And when I first put it up online, I figured, who's going to do my course? Women that are married for 5 years, 10 years. I was shocked when I started getting emails from women that wrote to me, I could be your grandmother. I'm probably 3 times your age, and this is obviously when I was younger and doing it. And this knowledge that Baruch Hashem is so much more available today to you and your generation and the younger girls. We knew nothing about this. Like, no one was teaching this to us. And the letters that they've written to me about the transformation that can even happen 40 years into marriage. I would always get so choked up when I would read these feedbacks, because that shows that change is possible at every stage. Change is possible at every stage. So if intimacy is about into me see, and if physical and sexual intimacy is about the emotional intimacy expressing itself physically, then we have to be willing to be seen. We have to be willing to be seen. And we can't expect our husband to see us if we don't make ourselves shown and known.
Right. So I guess that's on the one side, that maybe if she was the one that was resistant to being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Maybe she was resistant to being vulnerable because the few times that she was vulnerable, he didn't receive it, or he threw it back at her, or so there's already a dynamics, because otherwise she would have been vulnerable.
Right.
So what do you suggest to someone who is not sure that her vulnerability is going to be received?
Yeah. 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 So first of all, I would say it's important to be able to, what's the word? To hold that, like to be able to say, I was hurt. I was rejected. Because we have a tendency sometimes to just like kind of like suppress it and either decide that we're never trying again, or to try again and be hurt again. And to just be able to sit and cry if you can, like to just hold those moments where it was so painful, where you made yourself so exposed and it wasn't well received, and to first be able to really hold that pain and make space for it, which I think is also another skill that as we reach menopause is very important to learn. Because let's talk about, for instance, children getting married and leaving home. You're making a chasana. Yay, that's so exciting. You're so happy. And like you have to put on this like huge smile. And then like you come home and you look at like your little baby girl who's getting married next week, and you just want to like hold her and cry because you don't want to let her go. And then then these thoughts start to come to you. You should be thankful. Not everyone has the chus to bring all their children to the chuppah. And then there's the thought of, yeah, but I'm going to miss her. Then there's the thought of, is she even old enough to get married? Is she mature? And there's so much going on. And we can just so easily take all that noise, because as it is, life is so crazy. We don't really have time to just meditate on our emotions and just shove it all down. So I think in general, at this stage in life where we are going to experience such a range of emotions, to be able to just hold them. And I have a friend of mine, she's older than me. She said to me one day, she was Baruch Hashem busy making a simcha. She said, she got up one morning and she said to me, Faigy, I realized that if I don't go to the beach for a few hours and just write and cry, I will be a wicked witch until this wedding. I just need to process. And she said, and thank God, I finally learned to give that to myself. I got in my car and I drove to the beach and I just sat there and I wrote and I cried, and then I went out, I took myself out for lunch and I got a good, and I came home like a different person. And I look at that and I say like, wow, like I'm happy that I have such friends. Like that's such a good example of where we need to learn to hold our emotions, because there's a lot of them. So for the woman who's tried to make herself vulnerable and maybe tried a few times, I think it's important to hold on to that pain. And then I would say, again, I'm talking to someone in a healthy marriage. Okay. So hopefully in a healthy marriage, there could be moments where there was vulnerability that wasn't met well. But I would hope that in a few, in a few years of marriage, maybe there's a moment here and there where it was well received. Maybe not when it came to the bedroom, but to try to, once we've felt the emotions and given them space, to then say, okay, but 1 second, maybe there were times in my marriage where I managed to make myself vulnerable and my husband was able to receive it. And to try to focus on that a little bit and say, okay, so it's not like my husband absolutely cannot handle my vulnerability. Maybe something about the way I'm doing it is triggering something in him. So then it's about trying to figure out, what can I do a little bit different that won't trigger that reaction in him? If he's shutting down or if he's disrespectful to my vulnerability, it must be triggering to him. And this is where I think it's important, especially when we want to make a change of the trajectory of our marriage, to work with someone from the outside, because we're very wrapped up in ourselves, right? And it says in Chazal, Ein chavush matir et atzmo mibeit ha'asurim. Someone who's in jail can't get themselves out of jail. You need someone to come and take you out. So sometimes we get entrapped in our own self, and sometimes working with an external mentor, someone a little bit older and wiser, can help us figure out where Yes, it's true. You've made yourself vulnerable, and I applaud you for that. That's amazing. But perhaps we need to tweak that a little bit so that it's not triggering your husband. Okay. And that I think is something that women could learn how to do.
Right. And it would be nice if he also learned how to do it, but we're talking to women, so let's go with
Right.
that.
We can't change others. We can just try to change ourselves. But
And so it's,
very often, again, in a healthy marriage, very often when a wife makes a change like that and she learns how to be vulnerable, but in a way that her husband is able to hear it, then he also something opens up and then he's willing to change. And I've seen that happen many times.
of course, because we spoke a bit about the emotional aspect of it, but there's also the hormonal and just libido is down. I mean, it's just not
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. So I heard this quoted. I didn't hear it with my own ears quoted from Berkowitz, but I've heard it said by my very dear friend Rebbitzin Ruthie Halberstadt in the name of Berkowitz, and I hope that I'm quoting this accurately. She said something to the extent of, since sexual intimacy is an expression, like we said, of that innate oneness that every couple essentially is, we would think that maybe marital intimacy, sexual intimacy, should be reserved for later years in marriage, once they've worked on their marriage and cultivated and nurtured a relationship. Now we can finally express that oneness, right? Right. But as we know, we encourage, right at the beginning, we encourage a chassan and kala to try to consummate their marriage at the very, very early stages of their relationship, when there really isn't true love, there isn't a level of devotion and closeness. Nothing has developed yet. It's just the beginning, and that's where intimacy is not only an expression of that innate oneness, it's also an expression of our loyalty and commitment to nurturing this oneness and creating it and cultivating it each and every day. So if we're only going to rely on, am I in the mood? Am I feeling up to it? Is my body feeling those feelings, that maybe we felt easier when we were younger? And the answer might be no. It might be so dry. And dry also physically, like one of the things with menopause and already perimenopause is women suffer with vaginal dryness, and this can really cause intimacy to be painful. So there are solutions to all these things. And even if we're just raising awareness, people should know, first of all, these are things that people don't talk about to their friends. Know that this is normal. And intimacy is not meant to hurt. Sexual intimacy is not meant to hurt at any stage in life. So if there's pain, that's your body whispering and saying, no, 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 something needs to be adjusted. Okay. And very often it could be, like you said, the estrogen levels that are changing, and there's natural replacements. There's different therapies. We're not going to go into like how to solve that problem, but just to know that that's normal. Okay. And everything can feel much more dry. So now I'm talking about more like the mental dryness, the emotional dryness. It's just, you're just not feeling that fire anymore. And it's very easy to kind of like resign to, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. If it happens, it happens. If he wants it, he wants it. If not, not. And then weeks, and even I'm sure months can go by. I'm sure women have shared this with you, that months can go by without a couple actually closing their bedroom door, getting into bed, and making sure that sexual intimacy happens, and happens in a way that's good for both of them. So this is where these words of Berkowitz should be like the shining, guiding star. We want to make this a priority in life. We can't just wait for spontaneity. We need to figure out, literally, to pencil it into our very busy calendars to make sure that it happens. So if, let's say, a couple decides that at this stage in life, they want to be together once a week, twice a week, everyone will figure out what works for them, once in a week and a half, 3 times in a week and a half, whatever. But it needs to be happening on a constant enough basis that when we look back at like a few months, the past 6 months, we could look back and say, yes, sexual intimacy is happening in our relationship on a fairly regular basis. We want it to be on a fairly regular basis. So it's important to literally, I know this sounds so unromantic, to like open up your Google calendar on Motzei Shabbos and look ahead. What's your schedule like? What's my schedule like? Okay, how are we planning this week? Okay, Sunday night you'll be at a wedding. Monday night I have a meeting at work. Tuesday night the kids are going to be around. Okay, Wednesday night. Okay, put it in your calendar. A little smiley face. Put something on the calendar. Whatever. If it's a family calendar, you want to put something that the kids won't understand, but it's got to be on the calendar, because if it's not on the calendar, it's not going to happen. And it doesn't mean that you have to have a Google Calendar, right? It could be your mental calendar, but there needs to be planning. So people might jump out at me and bite my head off and say, what do you mean? If it's not spontaneous, if it's not coming because like I want it, then what's it worth? So first of all, let's think back to mikveh years, right? When we were young and getting our periods, right? Mikveh night is usually, we know it a week in advance, right? We did a hefsek. We know that in a week we'll be going to the mikveh. So in some funny way, it's the most not spontaneous night of the month. And in most homes, I can't say that this is true by everyone, but in many homes, mikveh night is pretty pleasant. And yet it was very planned. And that makes me wonder, maybe it's actually the planning that made it what it was. The anticipation of it, the looking forward to it, the waking up in the morning on mikveh day and like looking at your husband in the eye a little bit differently. Your husband saying, honey, what do you need from me today so that you could go to the mikveh calmly and come home and we could be together in a special, sweet way. Learning to have that conversation. So I wonder if we cannot take that and copy paste it to the years when we don't have mikveh and where intimacy has to be scheduled into our calendars. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And really, really planning. Now, what does it mean to plan? We're not going to plan because we don't know how the evening is going to unfold, but to look at it as date night. Now, for some couples, that can actually be like, for many women, this works well. Go out of the home, go out for dinner, go walk by the beach, go do something outside the home, and then come home and go straight to your bedroom. Like, just avoid everything if you can. Like, if you don't have little kids at home, some women, like my mother, who has, I'm in my 40s and my youngest is only 9, my youngest brother's only 19. You still have kids around, but to really try to create this context that's much more conducive to emotional intimacy, which will hopefully translate into physical intimacy. Okay. So figuring that out together and making a commitment and penciling it in is something that I'm not going to say works for everyone, but it could work nicely for many. And I think most and foremost, it's about having the right approach and understanding that sexual intimacy is not only an expression of that oneness, but it's also what actually nurtures it and creates it and expresses our loyalty and commitment to the marriage like nothing else. So
The
that's,
concept that I
that's what I
love,
think.
this word, I don't know how to pronounce it, but this Vorfreude is where the anticipation of something is a very big part of the actual activity or experience. They usually associate it with vacation, but it really could be anything.
Wow.
And I think that knowing in advance, and let's say it's 3 days in advance, you can do things or together or yourself, or he can do for you, and you can just, like you said earlier, tell him your needs, so that the anticipation is there, that can help the libido. Libido is hormonal, but hormones actually still work with emotions. And so I think that knowing that your libido is low, and you could do things hormonally for that, or naturally for that, but I think that you can create the context. And I think that's a really important piece, is putting it on the calendar so that you can create the context. And then maybe the spontaneity throughout, in between. But
Exactly.
I think that really planning it can really make a big difference.
Right. And I think, Devora, that the ability to plan it from a place of, even if a woman's not feeling it in her body, to plan it from a place of, I want to put this on my calendar, not because I'm a martyr, because I want to, really happens when we appreciate what intimacy is in a marriage. Again, and I'm purposely using here the word intimacy without the word sexual intimacy, because as we said, that's really what it's about. There has to be intimacy in the marriage. And when a woman understands that the culmination of that emotional intimacy happening through sexual intimacy is very, very important. Not for him, because he's a man and he has needs. No, for you, for the marriage. So then we're able to put that into our calendar. And like you said, the anticipation. If someone's dreading it and they're just putting it in their calendar because they're their dutiful wife and they're doing what's expected of them, that's not gonna be anticipation. That's just gonna be anxiety for 3 days, right? That needs to be examined. And that's someone who, if they're feeling that way, should try to seek solutions, because we don't want anyone living in anxiety for 3 days. I think understanding that the value and the importance of this aspect of the relationship is what allows us to pencil it in, plan it. It's okay if it's not spontaneous, right? Giving up on that notion and being able to then work within what we have, that's very, very beautiful and rich. And a great mashal that I heard from one of the professionals that I trained with. She said, the physical life, the bedroom life of a young couple is like strawberries and cream. Think of a cake covered with strawberries and cream. It's fluffy, it's airy, it looks very attractive. You lick it away, it feels good in the mouth for about 2 seconds, and then it's gone. And now we're left with this like dilapidated cake that all the cream has been licked off of. It does not look very attractive. So if someone was wise, they baked a delicious, rich chocolate cake. They weren't so wise, and they just baked some like simple cake that ends up in the garbage. We want to make sure that as we are enjoying the early years, not everyone has that, by the way, but for those couples that did enjoy that very fluffy, exciting beginning, first of all, to know that it's fluffy. It's not very real yet. It's not very deep yet. We want to be hand in hand building something very deep so that when we do reach these years, our 40s, our 50s, and beyond, we're left with something that might look a little dilapidated, a little bit less attractive, but it's so rich. It's rich. It's that rich chocolate cake. It's a richness that you can try to explain it to a young couple. They'll never understand it. They'll understand it now, right? And that's my hope and prayer, that anyone listening to this will hopefully either have the tools or access the tools or find the tools to build that richness and that depth, because that's really what it's all about.
I sometimes wonder where the idea of spontaneity makes the sexual intimacy so much richer. I wonder where that idea even came from. There's something about the arousal from the experience, whatever is happening, but that doesn't make it the only way. And I think that somewhere it got lost.
So I don't know if I'm right. It would be very interesting actually to like research this from like a, like a social perspective. But I think that this spontaneity thing is very much, we've been influenced by the Western world, by the world of media and movies and Hollywood, because it's not very entertaining to watch the unfolding of a couple's life over many decades, and eventually their sexual relationship is so rich and beautiful. Now that's very boring, because how do we get there? It's the nights where the husband stayed up and helped his wife, while she was nursing, and it's the days when she supported him while he was going to medical school, and it's the afternoons where he gave up what he was doing to play basketball with the kids. Like it's built up of a lot of little things that accumulate over a lifetime. Whereas this spontaneity, like, oh, he walks through the door and she's just through the ceiling with desire for him, that doesn't exist in real life, but we've been sold that story. So this spontaneity making sexual intimacy more exciting, I think, is a very, very Western idea that has really, really, really messed with marriages.
And I think that people comparing themselves to that situation and saying we're never spontaneous, it must be something about our relationship. Right. I think that it really burdens the relationship. I think that exactly. Spontaneity is like these little bursts. That's what spontaneity is like little bursts. Right. It's not and weekly bursts.
They happen and sometimes they don't, and that's really okay. Because if at the end of the day it's a growing couple and they make their relationship a priority and they invest in it a little bit every single day, that's all Hashem ever wants of us, is just to continue growing. And that's what I was saying at the beginning. I look at my parents and they're always growing. Like that's, to me, that's like the biggest compliment you could give someone, is that they're a growing person, because that's what Hashem wants from us. So if someone is listening to their recording and they happen to be young and in their 20s and they're just curious, so I'm so happy that they're getting this information now and they could think ahead, what do I want my marriage to look like when I'm 50? And if someone is listening to this conversation now and they're 50 or 60, then know that it's never too late to make little changes. Just to continue growing.
What I want to add to that is that it doesn't always have to end up like with actual intercourse. It could be just getting together, just like being together in bed, and let's see where this goes. It doesn't really have to be
100%. And again, that's where it's important for a woman to learn to convey to her husband where she's holding, what she's feeling, to be honest, right? And sometimes a woman might not be feeling physiologically desiring in her body. Okay, she might not feel like her body wants to be intimate right now, But as long as there's no resistance, it's not like her cells are yelling no. Then a woman, if let's say a husband wants to be with his wife and he's clearly expressing desire, and she could motivate herself emotionally. And I'm not talking about, again, I'm not talking about suppression of emotions. I'm not talking about not showing up honestly. But whatever, she's tired, she had a long day. It didn't occur to her today to be intimate tonight, okay? And her husband is expressing desire. Should a woman show up in those moments if she can? Of course she can. And surprisingly, she might start out feeling not very much, she might not be feeling it in her body. And she's happy to go along because, yeah, at the end of the day, we do want to fulfill each other's needs. And she wants to be there for her husband. And she just might discover in 10, 20, 50, 10, 20, 25 minutes from now that she's actually experiencing a lot of pleasure. And I think it's important at all stages, but especially at menopause, to differentiate between arousal and desire and between the ability to have pleasure. We often lump those all together. Okay, so let's say a husband might ask his wife straight out or in whatever language they develop between themselves, their cues. But basically, the message from him is a question of, are you in the mood? To which she might answer, no, because maybe she's really not in the mood. But does that not mean that if she can relax into that sexual space and slowly her body will open up, will she not begin to feel pleasure? In many, many, many cases, it will. However, if we stay stuck in that anxiety of, am I feeling it? Am I not feeling it? Am I in the mood? I don't know if I'm in the mood. I don't know. I'm not sure. And like we just kind of like get like, stuck in our brain a little bit. So then we're not in the experience. So to be able to see beyond. So even if right now a woman is not feeling this, let's call it like a physical hunger in her body to be with her husband, but if she can find herself motivated to relax into the space and open up, like you said, and see what happens, see where it goes.
So I heard someone say the question they should ask themselves, or he could ask her is, can you get in the mood?
Mm-hmm. So I
Like,
don't know if I like that either.
as opposed, it's like the idea is not as if can you get, but are you relaxed enough that you can see if we can get there? Like let's just see where this goes. Like that, not just saying that we're going necessarily going to get there, but let's just see. I think that was the tone is let's just see where this goes. Can you get into the mood of let's just see where this goes? Are you in that
Right,
space?
right, 100%. But I'll tell you what, because I feel like there's so much focus on mood, I find that at least, okay, maybe because the vast majority of women that I come across are younger and their marriage is not as developed, they're at a different stage. Just the word, are you in the mood? Can you get in the mood? Can just bring up so much anxiety and resentment. Whereas, can you just relax? Are you willing to receive pleasure? Are you willing? Can you just see yourself right now getting into bed and just relaxing and opening up to schmoozing and chatting and giggling and tickling and relaxing? And then can you just like see yourself going down that
Right.
path? Yeah, I think I could do that, right? So then do we need the mood?
Yeah.
I
So
don't know if we
I
need the
think the
mood.
mood is really words that we use, and they really have weight. These words. I think that the idea is still the same idea. Like, can we see where this can go? Are
Right,
you instead of those two long sentences that you
right,
said?
right.
Every couple can come up with their shortcut, like
With their
whatever it
right,
is. You can even
with
say
their
jar of
lingo.
watermelon, and
Right,
that can mean whatever you want it to mean instead of saying
right,
two
exactly.
sentences.
Exactly. But to try to break away from that equation that, oh, in order for the physical intimacy to work, we need the wife to be in the mood. And I like to challenge that and say, is that true? As long as there's not resistance, as long as she's not angry and upset at her husband, in which case she should not be with her husband if she's angry, because then there's not connection. Can she surrender into that space? Okay, many times the answer might be, I'm willing to try. I'm willing to try. And again, with all authenticity, not with faking it, not with pretending. So maybe he'll express a lot of desire that evening and she'll just enjoy the warmth and the closeness, what Chazal referred to as the kiruv basar, the closeness of the flesh. That just might be all she needs tonight, right? So she got what she needed. She feels loved. She feels like she's the only woman in his life. He had the pleasure that he desired and the release of tension that he needed and everyone's happy. But if we have all of these ideas in our mind, many of them have filtered into us from Western thinking, then it's like, well, it's not like in the movies, and there's not all this like desire in the room, so maybe something's lacking. And I find that, especially in the younger groups of women that come to speak to me, very often they don't even need much guidance. They just need me to look in their eye and say, actually, you guys are doing great. You're doing great. You're lacking nothing. They just need to hear that from someone who meets hundreds and hundreds of people. And I could say that you're doing great. And that's very, very normalizing, right? So, so if a couple is committed to making sure that marital intimacy is happening often enough, and it's happening on a regular enough basis, and both partners feel that they can most of the time be most, vulnerable for the large part, that's amazing. That is not to be taken for granted, right? That's not to be taken for granted.
And those not little, but those medical issues, those physical issues really can be addressed. There are all kinds of doctors, therapists, whether it's pelvic floor, whether it's your gynecologist, whether it's an endocrinologist who can give you hormones, whatever it is. Don't let that aspect be what's holding back from a really good sexual relationship and the intimacy that it brings, because those all can be addressed. I think that the emotional part for some people could be the harder part than actually going to the doctor, or for some people going to the doctor could actually be the harder part. But
Right.
that should never be the reason why there's an issue.
100%. 100%. And when we do make this commitment, and it's never too late to recommit, right? When we make this commitment and we decide, okay, it's been however many years of marriage. Maybe my identity has been more mother than wife, and now I want it to be more wife than mother. So now I am taking this year and I'm committing to taking care of my health, to taking care of my husband's health. We all know that husbands don't go to the doctors on their own. We have to make their appointments usually, right? So to really, the minute we understand the importance and the weight that we know from a Jewish perspective, from a Torah perspective, from a Kabbalistic perspective, we understand the weight and the power that that sexual intimacy has in a marriage when done right. So we say, whoa, okay, this is a new value in my life. So I want this to work. I'm going to go to that gynecologist and get that cream that I need. I'm going to get my hormones in check. I'm going to start doing weight training, right? I'm going to encourage my husband. We're going to go for a walk together every night. I'll make sure he sees the doctor. Maybe he needs something that will help him function a little better. There'll be less stress in the bedroom. So it's about making it that priority. And I really just want to end off with a beautiful thought. When Klal Yisrael were traveling through the desert during the years in the desert after Yetzias Mitzrayim, they camped around the Mishkan, right? So the Mishkan had the Kodesh HaKadoshim in it, which was the Holy of Holies. In the Holy of Holies was the Kruvim, the Aron, I think it's called the Ark, maybe, right? With the Luchos inside and covered by this cover that had the Kruvim. The Kruvim were two golden images, shaped from one piece of gold, carved into these two beautiful golden images. That's, to symbolize the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael. And it was the form, the shape of a male and female facing each other in an embrace, the male embracing the female, okay? And this was the holiest place in the world where only the Kohen HaGadol had access to on Yom Kippur, right? And it says that the Shekhinah comes into the world in that space between the Kruvim, okay? That intimate, very, very undiluted, concentrated space of intimacy, that's where the Shekhinah comes into the world. And the Bnei Yisrael camped around the Mishkan. And the Kodesh HaKadoshim was a central part of the Mishkan, right? So central not in its location, but central in its essence, right? So too, we need to make sure that we camp our life, that we build our life around the Holy of Holies, because every couple's bedroom life is a mashal of that. It's a reflection of godliness in the world, of Shekhinah. That's why the Shekhinah comes down to a home when a husband and wife have intimacy, emotional intimacy, sexual intimacy, spiritual intimacy, mental intimacy. So we want to make sure that we make this a priority, and everything else we fit around it. It's not like, oh, if we have time, we'll get to it. This is central, and we want to build our life around it. And that's how we want to travel through life.
I think that visual is wonderful. So thank you, Faigy. So how can people reach you? What's your way of your course, the way to reach you?
Okay, so if anyone wants to join my mailing list or look into my course, I think you will, hopefully, you'll be able to
I'll put in the
link the
show
links in
notes,
the
but
show
you can say
notes.
it for those who are
And
just
they can
listening.
also email me at office at, this is going to be now one long word, unblockyourway.co.il. Office at unblockyourway.co.il. And I have an online intimacy course called Unblock Your Way to Oneness. Because as I said at the beginning, I believe that oneness is innate to every couple. And I see it as my role to help people unblock that so that they can tap into that. So I have an online course and I have an online community of incredible women. I send emails. I try to send, working on sending them more often, and to just hopefully be here really to serve my Jewish sisters world,
In this important
all around
area.
the
So
world.
thank you, Faigy. It's important work. And I'm so glad I met you.
Thank you. And thank you for this opportunity. And you should be blessed in everything you do. And that only good should come from this endeavor. And all the women who need healing and need guidance, they should be blessed with the right tools and the right people in their life. And don't ever give up. Don't ever give up.
I mean,
That's my
wonderful.
message
Thank
to
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me in another fascinating conversation about midlife. If you'd like to reach me, Devora Krasnianski, to talk about your midlife or anything else, you can reach me at jewishmidlife@gmail.com. You can also find us on our website, jewishmidlife.com, and follow us on Jewish Midlife on Instagram or Facebook, and join our conversations in our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Jewish Women Talk About Midlife. And share what we're doing with your friends and others in the midlife phase.